can still do in the Department of Treasury, especially when it comes to housing finance. I mean, we can't forget what happened in '07, and unfortunately, we've not been able to prevent statutorily a recurrence of what may happen in a housing bubble. And I would love to see credit risk transfers being implemented from the private sector to release some of that burden that the government now has in backing these mortgages, but yet we're moving slow. And so we have to rely on you. And in public remarks earlier this year, Craig Phillips, one of your counselors, stated that the Department of Treasury is fully committed to the successful implementation of the single security initiative being undertaken by the FHFA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. I understand that taxpayers have sunk nearly $1 billion into this effort, and I'd be interested in your perspective on where things stand with this effort.
It is being implemented. It's something we support. But more broadly, I would just say I also support we need GSE reform. This is something that I am determined in the next Congress should be a major focus of ours, hopefully on a bipartisan basis. But we can't just leave these things sitting the way they are.
I couldn't agree more.
As they have been.
And which is why we're relying on your department, I think, to do as much as it possibly can, including the common securitization platform that complements this, that allows for the implementation of this. Do you think that platform, the common securitization platform, should be available to all market participants, not just Fannie and Freddie?
My strong preference is part of GSE reform that we create a system of competition, that if other people wanted to compete with the GSEs, they could. But obviously that's dependent upon certain changes to legislation.
That we have to make. And it's your understanding that there's plenty of capacity in the market to take some of that, is there not, from the GSEs?
I believe there is, but again, we need an overall solution to this.
And just for guidance, are there any other principles that you think are important that we should be following in order to do an effective GSE reform?
Again, I've said that as part of this, if there's either an explicit or an implicit guarantee. My preference is if there is a need for that, there's a explicit and the government is paid and taxpayers are compensated.
And I think that's reality in government and insurance anymore, unfortunately. But as a last backstop is where we're trying to get government to be when it comes to the guaranteeing. As you know, today there are about half as many companies that are going public than they did 20 years ago. In your opinion, why is that? I mean, is it lack of access to capital? Regulatory burdens?
I think it's regulatory burdens, and that's something we look forward to working with you on.
Excellent. And one of the things I want to just close by saying is that, you know, we have probably the best system of regulation when it comes to insurance with state regulators. And as under your direction through FIO, we are negotiating with the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. I think it's important that we deal from a position of strength and that we assert our ability to regulate on behalf of consumers, on behalf of capital requirements and solvency requirements, so that we are not influenced unduly by foreign markets when it comes time to reaching our deals with the IAIS. And for that, if you have any comments, I would appreciate that. Otherwise, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I think we agree with you and we're comfortable where we are and won't be unduly influenced.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver, ranking member of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, last week I had a meeting in Higginsville, Missouri, a town of 5,000 people in my congressional district in Missouri. I had a meeting of farmers, standing room only. We couldn't get anybody else in the center. Not one person in there believed that this tariff move by the president is good for them. Every 3 rows of soybeans that grows in Missouri goes to China. But I don't blame the president for this. I may be the only person in the country. I don't blame the president. I told them this. I blame Congress. We have allowed over the last 30 years the president, whomever was the occupant in the White House, to gradually take the constitutional responsibility of Congress from the War Powers Act of 1972. We went on to this. I mean, for example, the president shouldn't have the authority to do this because there's the law 232, the Tax Expansion Act, requires that there's a 270-day period during which we're supposed to be studying the issue, and the president is supposed to be waiting on us to do that. But because the founders never envisioned a compliant Congress, and so so what has happened, the president's just snatched power. I never forget, I almost had a nervous breakdown because of anger when President Obama stood up at the State of the Union and said he would sign no earmarks. He doesn't have that power. He doesn't have that power. The Constitution gives the power of the purse to the Congress. And we're just constantly giving more and more and more. And we don't, on something as critical as this whole tax issue, we are just saying to the President of the United States, in spite of the fact that there's legislation that would prohibit it or give direction to him, you do whatever we want to do, and we're going to sit here. Now, having said that, Mr. Secretary, do you believe that in spite of my farmers going crazy, Kansas City Southern's world headquarters is in my district. Kansas City Southern Railroad, which means they go south through Kansas, down through Texas, and into Mexico, and they are extremely concerned and frustrated. So are you saying all these people are just misguided and they'll be okay next week?
I don't want to in any way imply that they're misguided because, again, I understand the impact that this is having on specific areas, especially the farmers, which I think are being unfairly targeted. And as I said, it's a major focus of ours to make sure that we can compete fairly, and we're very focused on these trade issues, as you've outlined, but I understand the issues.
Well, do you think that these trade wars have ever worked? I mean, if discuss Smoot-Hawley, 1930. Did that work?
Again, I would just say I don't think we're in a trade war. We're in a situation of trade disputes. Okay, these are not trade wars, and we are very focused, as I said, on the NAFTA issue, which is renegotiating an old agreement. We're very focused on the China issue, which is very complicated, as you've outlined, in fair trade.
Okay, so if I hit Al Green with my fist, we're not really in a fight. We're kind of in negotiations. I mean, we hit China. China hit us back. That's not a war, a fight?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're in a fight at all. As a matter of fact, the president has specifically commented on his relationship with President Xi and how they're helping us with North Korea and other areas. And again, as I've just said, I don't think in any way we're in a fight with Canada and Mexico. Quite the contrary. We're very focused on these agreements. And I'm going down to Mexico tomorrow as a sign of the importance of that.
Well, do you also agree then that Smoot-Hawley, based on economists, your people that you would respect, agree that it was the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930 that created less confidence in the markets, which contributed to the length of the collapse of the world economy, which happened actually back in '29, a few months earlier, that did not contribute?
I think it wasn't the only issue, but it did contribute, and that's why I said we're monitoring this very carefully.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Pittenger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. Really want to appreciate, of course, your strong work and support for our FIRMA legislation to reform CFIUS. A particular note, I'd like to publicly thank Assistant Secretary Heath Tarbert for his great work in brokering this with multiple agencies and committees, individuals in the House and Senate. He did an incredible job, so thank you to him, please. Mr. Secretary, are there any aspects or concerns that you have of the current legislation that would create a loophole or other manner of which it could be exploited by an adversarial interest?
I'm sorry, you're referring to the current CFIUS or you're talking about FIRMA?
FIRMA, the FIRMA bill as we are negotiating it between the House and Senate.
First of all, thank you for thanking us on the work of FIRMA. I'd like to thank the House and the Senate for the enormous bipartisan support. And as I've emphasized to the chairman and leadership on both sides, we want to get this passed as part of the NDAA. This is very, very important to the Treasury and our role of CFIUS.
Yes, sir. Are there any aspects of it that you would favor or be concerned about, or at the end of the day, the final legislation that you feel like needs to more clearly or address on any issues that remain outstanding?
Again, we're very happy with the legislation. I think, as you know, there's some slight differences between the House and the Senate version, and I actually had the opportunity to meet with the chairman before this morning's testimony, and I think we're going to work together and with the conferees on trying to get this done quickly.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, following the President's trip last year to Riyadh to meet with the Arab Muslim countries, some 55 or so countries, from that, I recall an announcement of an anti-terrorism financing center to be set up in Riyadh. Do you have any further information on that, or what's happened following that announcement?
Sure. I have a lot of information on that because we are the focus of that at Treasury. That was a major focus of ours for the President's trip. I actually had the pleasure of signing the MOU on my trip last year. It was a major focus. I went to Saudi Arabia and saw the opening of the center. I'll be going back, I believe, in October, and I've committed on an annual basis to go back. We've issued the first sanctions jointly out of the TFTC, and this is one of our major priorities at Treasury.
Thank you, sir. As well, would you have any comments that you could make referencing the MOU with Qatar, given the concerns we had in the past regarding the complicit role that Qatar had with harboring known financiers or funding for kidnapping or other foundations that were utilized, that there was a State Department MOU, which I have read, that would encourage Qatar to be more engaged with us in our oversight?
I can't comment on past activities, but I can comment on current activities.
Yes, sir.
I think they've made significant progress. We're working with them very closely. They are part of the TFTC. We've also had bilateral discussions. I've met with them recently on an ongoing basis, and we are very focused on working on terrorist financing with them.
Yes, sir. Do you see any remaining concerns in terms, do you feel like they've fully turned the corner?
Again, I want to be careful in what I say on this. There's always more work to do, but they've made very significant efforts in the right direction.
Just changing the focus a little bit now, in reference to 2155, could you give me some idea of the role that the Treasury will play in terms of the implementation of that?
We're going to be actively involved. Just checking the number. We are going to be.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because I always refer to as FIRMA. I apologize. We are going to be actively involved. We've already started working on drafting regulations. We have a team of people that are ready to